All right, so good evening, everybody. My name is Erkki Huhtamo. I'm a professor at the Department of Design Media Arts. And it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce our distinguished Regents speaker. So, Department has been very lucky this academic year to have not only one but two Regents lectures. This is the second of those talks. But before I talk a little bit about Chico MacMurtrie, I would like to read a statement from the Department of Design Media Arts. So the department acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva people. So, as a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to the Honyukwem, meaning ancestors, Ahirodidom, elders, and Eyohinkham, our relatives' relations, past, present, and emerging. After this, I would just like to say just a very briefly a few words about the Chico MacMurtrie and his career, because we'll hear very soon in much greater detail. Also about the fact that Chico, quite some time ago, actually graduated from the UCLA. So he studied legendary artists like Charles Ray and Paul McCarthy and Chris Burden, actually in this building at the time. So since the late 1980s, Chico MacMurtrie has explored the intersection of robotic sculpture, new media installation, and performance. MacMurtrie has long been fascinated with the sculptural expression of soft movement. Since 2005, he has pioneered the use of high tensile composite fabric as an artistic medium, and does it in order to create large-scale organic soft machines that evoke molecular structures and echo the movements of microorganisms. So Chico and his interdisciplinary collective, which is called Amorphic Robot Works, or ARW, have received numerous awards for their experimental new media artworks, and these include 5 grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Andy Warhol Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, so Chico was a fellow, Vida Life 11.0, Pries Ars Electronica in Linz, Austria, the Guggenheim Fellowship, and a M.F.A Fund grant in 2011. So MacMurtrie's works have been presented very widely in major museums and cultural institutions around the world. And this is a far too long list, but I will just mention the National Art Museum of China, or NAMOC, in Beijing, Hayward Gallery in London, Museum de la Reina Sofia in Madrid, Cité des Sciences et de l'Industrie in Paris, Museo Universitario de Arte Contemporáneo in Mexico City, Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, New York, Shanghai Biennale, and so on and so on, Queens Museum, Bronx Museum, and many other places. Currently, Chico, as you will learn, I think, in this presentation, is working on a very timely large-scale project, which is called Border Crossers. And it couldn't be a better time to have this lecture when a certain person from Washington seems to have invaded this city tonight. So this topic, as you will see, forms a certain kind of counter-narrative to those ideas. So please help me welcome Chico MacMurtrie.
out, huh? Okay. So, how about this? Everybody was saying okay, but maybe it wasn't okay? Okay. So, so to start out with a little bit of the name Amorphic Robot Work. Amorphic Robot Works is the name for my collective of people who have worked with me over the years. And so many of these people have come and sort of studied with me, collaborated with me. Sitting here today is my wife, Louise, who actually is the director, really. She directs all of the activity of the group. And my daughter, Mina, okay, Mina, you have to stand up. Can you stand up? She wanted to be introduced, so I thought maybe she wants to stand up. So this is Mina MacMurtrie, and she's my assistant in life, but probably is going to be helping me a little bit more as time goes on. But in any case, so before I got to graduate school here, I was studying art at the University of Arizona in Tucson. And at the time, after I had gotten through my basic work, which was, a lot of drawing and sculpture, and I began to discover performance through studies of movement in the dance department, and having discovered improvisation, it was a way to physically move into these types of performances that would come. This is a shot from my film that actually I got to show this film to Chris Burden, and he encouraged me to come here, and it was an interesting start. And in a way, here's this human body looking into this kind of carnage of the earth and of waste and things like that. And part of it asked, I chose the image because it kind of asked this question about what does art mean? Why would my art be significant? Why should I pursue art? And I had come across this term called duende, when duende is sort of like, how do you, it has everything to do with that burning passion inside. If you find that burning passion inside, what does it become? And so I'm going to take you through a sort of voyage through my burning passion over the last 35 years. And so here goes. All right. Let's get it going here. Okay, so this is just a still image from that film, and the film was called Black Air, and it sort of had everything to do with having experimented with sculpture and departed through painting into performance. And in the performance, it had a lot to do with this sort of transformational nature of both taking your body to a state of physical depletion and exhaustion. And through taking it through this physical depletion and exhaustion, you kind of find this animal state. And in finding this animal state, you have this sort of pure expression that's not caught up in choreography or not caught up in movement studies, but it's just sort of a pure visceral reaction. And the irony about that is, go ahead, is that this leads to a series of 4 films that I did here at UCLA, and those films, this being the first one, and we're going to cue it.
mountain.
Thank you, Jade. This is Jade who's assisting me. So I just wanted to show a little clip from that. And so so I arrive in LA for graduate school from being in a sort of small town in Arizona. And I kept getting kind of freaked out by this idea of the tremors or the earthquakes. And I meant to say this before I showed the clip. So the subhuman had to do with my fear of living in LA and how to challenge that fear. Basically, it was like, well, at any moment there'll be an earthquake, and so how do I get out of that? How do I deal with that? So I started working on this idea of a balloon in my studio in downtown LA that at the moment that the earthquake hit, I could jump into the balloon and it would deploy and open my windows and I could escape, or float, temporarily float. But that didn't happen. Instead, all the passion went into making that film, which took the entire year. But I think more importantly is that the film and the process of making animated films taught me about animatronics and how to make things move. So in a way, storyboarding movement helped me literally figure out how to make things move mechanically. And so, and also studying the figure, the body, physical movement allowed me to sort of break into this area of like, how do you physically make a machine do that if you're not an engineer? And so for me, it was like, I felt what I wanted to do, and so the desperate thing to do was like, well, how does it work? Where does all that stuff come from? And so after I had finished my thesis work here, I had made a series, like my first 9 machines that were quite primitive, and that made up my thesis show. And after that, I was sort of searching what to do next, and I spent a few years on this machine. This is called the Tumbling Man, and I had learned how to weld, and I had learned a little bit about pneumatics, and I was carrying this around with me as I was traveling around in my Volkswagen van, and every once in a while I'd throw it out of the van and try to run it and get it to go, and it couldn't do it, it just was struggling. It was really struggling to move. And I ended up at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which is an art science museum, and they took me in, they kind of adopted me, and they gave me access to their tools. And an engineer, I mentored with an engineer, and he kind of took me to the back storage room where he would show me where there were cylinders and valves. And so 6 months later, the Tumbling Man came to life in that workshop. And so it had everything to do with the sort of internal struggle to try to figure out how to make things move. And so the Tumbling Man, the idea was that it somersaults like a child. But I also wanted it to be like a heavy machine that could sort of assault the very ground that it tumbled on, but yet after this very primitive gesture to somersault. You know how that feels when you were a kid, to somersault. And so it in fact could somersault, but it struggled extremely to somersault. And by the end of it, I end up building this first telemetry suit, which I'm wearing here with one of the machines that comes afterwards. So in the telemetry suit, I sit there and I use my body to control the body of the machine. So maybe the most interesting thing that happens was that the movements of my body to make this thing tumble ended up being more machine-like than the Tumbling Man. So in a way, my awkwardness led to the fluidity for the machine to move. And so then a number of years later, I worked with the composer from the sound score of the Subhuman to build this piece called the Trigram Robotic Opera. And in this opera were, I think, up to 10 of my early sculptural machines. And we had 15 humanoid performers. And together we performed this hour-long opera. And some of these works, I'll just point out a few names. This is the triple dripping fetus. So as you see, there's the first drip, second drip, third drip that gives birth to the fetus. And the fetus kind of swells, pulses, and it cries a little bit. And this is the drumming and drawing subhuman, which you don't see very well, but the drumming and drawing subhuman is in fact a robot built from the skin carcass that was left over from the film, the subhuman. So these characters from my earlier work kind of stuck around because in a way the work became an homage to their wisdom, their age, and their vulnerability, I guess. So anyways, so as time went on, I recognized that the humans were really problematic to work with. Not that they weren't nice people, but like programming the machines was easier. And so, the population of machines started growing and essentially started teaching the machines to perform themselves. So this is Hannah Sims performing the string body. And the string body, I forgot to mention, but the string body has 11 different string instruments on its body. And in this case, Hannah's moving and activating the different parts of the body with the action of the telemetry suit. But so what I forgot to mention going all the way back is that when the Tumbling Man tumbled, it musically performed this amazing range of sound that was directly associated with the very movement that it was doing. And so that led to the machines that played music. And then slowly that combination of sound and movement all kind of gave birth to these other machines that each were kind of a technical challenge. This was the walking legs, later named Joaquina Citroni, because she ran on hydraulics, oil over air systems. But literally the movement of this machine was very much like kind of plotting an arc as if you were doing actions in martial arts. And so I found that like if I tried to make the machine literally walk like we walk, it tended to fall. So I stuck to the structure of martial arts, and that taught me a lot about walking. Fast forward like, I don't know, maybe 15 years of making machines. Now there's a society of machines. There's over 50 humanoid-esque performers and 250 different mechanisms in this elaborate kind of operatic work about the evolution of the Earth and even referencing fetus pressure equals mountains, which was sort of like very much about the spirit of the earth itself giving birth to everything that exists, right? And so internally in the earth is something hidden. And so in these caverns are these liquid inseminating devices that drip primal ooze into these vessels that are very much like ears. So this primal ooze is kind of the beginning of rhythm, the beginning of language, and the beginning of communication. So these weren't a tribe of sophisticated musicians by any means, but they were capable of communication through sound. And so this is a little fast forward to an image from the Robotic Church where several of these machines are performing sort of at different times of the year. And it's set up as a permanent installation. And so it kind of, I'll show you a video that kind of takes you into my world a little bit from the point of view of the studio. And because the time is limited, it's hard to show a lot of action, but I think this videotape will help to show a little bit about the practice in the studio and how some of these machines move. If you were to take a scalpel and rip through the middle of my chest, my ribs would be Oh, yes, okay, here we go. Be catapulted outwards and all my organs would fly towards you, right? Can you guys picture that? When you're by yourself in a room, you know, you hear yourself breathing, you're really conscious of how alive you are as a human. What do you think, my technical man? What is it? So, perfect opportunity to human. I found that my work was focused on the most primitive aspects of being human. Those are the things that were intriguing to me. Looking deeper into the way humans are made started to become more of an investigation of sort of living things on a molecular level. Everything organic, if you look deep enough into it, it has a structure. Wait a minute, how am I built? How am I really built? I was interested in the idea of a humanoid machine that could stand up from a squatting position. I would go in and out of my studio and there was a door dampener, which was a cylinder. I stripped that door dampener off of there and I set it up to the compressor. The thing literally threw me back because it had such strength. And I'm like, this is what I need. Not knowing what I'm doing, drawing a lot, figuring out the process, talking to people. Eventually, we got this machine to display a very sophisticated quality of gesture, and it was the quality of gesture that I was after. It was a single important detail that I'd never seen before. That was to repeat itself. Each machine, sort of the same process. One by one, they come into existence. one machine inspired the next, and I started seeing how they could fit in together. I had looked at these machines as a society. Me and my wife were going back and forth between Paris and here as we were dating, and at one point it became obvious that we should get married. At that time, these machines had been stored for many years in Munich. This troupe of over 50 machines had toured for a number of years throughout Europe, and their container was rotting and these pieces were just rusting away. So I thought to myself, I'll restore them and have them perform the wedding. We managed to restore a lot of the robots' memories, a lot of their sequences. The most important part of making this kind of sculpture is the moment when the piece comes to life. I have a backup plan. Someone in the audience can throw out a question. Hurry. Okay, so anyways, where was all this work, mechanical studies and primitive aspects of the human condition going? This is a public sculpture at Yerba Buena Gardens, and it's called Urge, and Urge is a work that evolved over several years, and the idea is that it performs a very simple gesture that's common to all humanity, which is in fact just standing up, getting up from a squatting position and standing. And in doing so, it gestures out to the audience and asks the audience literally to join it. So if you look at the right and left side of the figure, it's sculpted as humanity rather than that's why the backup is a good idea. So it was sculpted half male and half female, and so
allow it. Oh, sorry. You want me to allow it next time?
this is sort of the
Let's.
we intentionally did this to see how
Is it running right now? I don't really want to turn it off.
So the figure is sculpted half male, half female, and standing on the bird. The idea is that it represents humanity, and maybe one of the fascinating things was what was happening to the Earth itself. So while the globe was sculpted in stainless steel, the continents were sculpted in mild steel, so they tended to decay badly, and the ones that decayed worse was actually Australia. The metal was completely eaten away, and Australia is where the porthole to get into the mechanism was. So straight in front, 40 feet away, is a chair, a bench. So you sit at the park bench, and when you sit at the park bench, the figure sits and joins you in the seated position, and when you stand up, it stands up with you. So last year, I was invited to restore the piece because this is the Moscone Center on the other side of it. So they've changed all the landscape architecture. And so I got an opportunity to restore it, and the earth was in really bad shape. The earth was really messed up. I mean, bad enough that I was willing to do this restoration because I wanted to give the earth another chance. So I cleaned it all up, and it was doing pretty well. The earth was doing pretty well. And the figure kept working for 20 years, and I also had an opportunity to restore it. So hopefully it's good for another 20 years. But so, here's another work that was out in the public arena for quite a while, and this is called this is the Fetus to Man. And the Fetus to Man at 12 o'clock forms a full figure. If you look at it closely, one side is completely older and one is younger. And so as it descends down to the 6 o'clock position, it becomes the younger form. And so you have the sort of the beginning of life again at 6 in the morning. And then you have it at, at full life at 12. So this is a kind of an interesting departure, and at the same time, it's a pretty important work. If anybody's sort of familiar with European, specifically French automotive history, this is the Citroën DS, and I had an opportunity to do a work for that company and their showroom on the Champs-Élysées, and so I proposed this notion referencing sort of the lowrider culture at the time. This is kind of pre-Transformer time before the movies hit the scene, and what I wanted to do was pay homage to this car because I felt like it maybe influenced the lowrider culture throughout LA and all these different places. And so instead of the car hopping up and down and bouncing and moving forward, I became interested in abstracting it into an organic entity, and doing that by dividing it into 26 different shapes, and then ultimately forming a 60-foot totem that was capable of.
Okay. Allow a block. Okay. Let's try allow. I tried block before.
Okay, I'll show a videotape of this, but I'm not even going to wear the mic or anything. It was a very interesting 2-year story, but ultimately I worked with a team of engineers who had worked with me for many years, and I got to hire them, pay them super well, make them work under extreme pressure, so we generate this thing in 3 months, and it's performing by the end of that time. And it's a super important breakthrough in a lot of ways, but maybe the most important is it starts to really introduce this notion of the soft machine emerging out of what was a hard machine that I was attempting to soften by the very act of separating it into a softer form. I hope we can make it through this video. So I'm gonna go for this video, and here goes. So the nice thing about the opportunities that I've had to show this work is they've often been in like a 5 or 6 story building where there was an atrium where you could see it from all the heights. And I think the sort of important, one of the most important aspects for me in pursuing sculpture and technology at the same time is how to get the sculpture to work from all of the different heights and angles. And so it was nice to be able to view it from those angles and heights. The other thing that was maybe interesting for me is that the work, when you saw it starting from here, let's say, it was very abstract, and then eventually it becomes a car again, which was maybe as interesting as it being a car, and then it becomes this total sort of abstract, organic, totemic thing. I'll let it become a car. So technically, this was run on a dual redundant ladder logic system with 250 sort of safety checkpoints. So as this thing came together like this, there was little sensors that knew it had come back into being a car, and by doing so, it would never hurt itself, which it really could. My friend's in the house. I'm not going to embarrass him, but he helped me work on this project as well, and he lives in LA. And everybody should meet him if they want, but he has a French name. I'm not going to disclose it. But in case anybody is really interested in talking about the car, or all this technology he's been involved with for years in the creative process. But let's see. So acknowledging sort of all of these participants is super important. If you're an artist and you're interested in working with technologies, I mean, you could spend a lot of time in learning how to do all those technologies yourself, so you wouldn't be dependent on anybody else, or just sort of, I encourage you to be friends with engineers, and if you're an engineer, to be friends with artists, and then like that collaboration thing really works, open up things for technological projects. Here's a project that actually was finished in a model scale. This is called the Organa Graph, and this was this is several years back. This was a model for a climate clock, and literally what it does is it monitors climate change by moving marbles through its system and keeping time. And in addition to that, the idea is that it plants a garden based on temperature change. So it's a time trail garden, and the piece moves forward for 100 years and generates all its electricity from these solar petals that close at night and open in the morning. And this is something that I'm very interested in going back to after. I'll explain in a moment. So this is just a detail of a tree, and the idea is that there's several marbles moving through this whole environment, and this is a spinning camshaft core which drives these little mechanisms so that the branches catch these dark marbles, and it sequesters this symbolic carbon, and then the tree literally helps to aid. Everybody's been hearing a lot about that stuff recently, so everybody knows what more trees do as opposed to less trees. This is a work from 2000, and this is called Skeletal Reflections. And Skeletal Reflections was about kind of a departure point of all the earlier humanoid machines. And what it is it's as close to a human as I could get in all those years of working on it. A human stripped of the skin, exposing the musculature, and the musculature in this case are sort of off-the-shelf actuators, and trying to get those actuators to integrate into the body. And the idea is that when you walk up to the figure and you strike a position, and you're sort of instructed to like think about the human body and art history. What are those postures? What are those movements? What are those expressions that are common in your studies today? And so we taught it about 30 postures, and then in 2000 you had to literally step on a little egg shape thing to strike your pose, right? So you strike your pose, and then it searches in the library for that posture, and it performs it. So it was another very great learning experience, because it took many years to complete it, and so even though I completed it in a way, it didn't get to what I was after. I was really after like the way you guys look in your seats right now, yawning or folding your arms or letting your face fall into your hands, right? I love the way people let their face fall into their hand because all of their flesh kind of wraps around your hands, just relax. And that's what I was after. And I couldn't do it with that robotic skeleton, so I started studying this notion of a soft machine. Like, let's get softer to human, or get closer to human. And in a way, this is a tiny sketch which captured it the most. And so that's my next sort of goal. I'm thinking about this. And so what happens is I come up with this sort of absurd walking machine with my very first soft muscles with this material. And the material, when you inflate it, you can create these structural trusses, and you can also turn them into muscle groups to articulate those trusses. So this work was simply called Spider, and it was it kind of walked around, and perhaps maybe it was as awkward as the early metal machines, but it just took a lot of R&D, and so I started thinking about these geometries, and as I mentioned in the video, these geometries and how to link the geometries each became like a technological challenge. So often I find myself doing sort of absurd things even by my own standards. So we're casting these balls, casting these cones, casting valves into them, putting wires through there, and then coupling them with O-rings and spacesuit technology, blah blah blah. It goes on, and this thing it ends up working. It ends up really leading to something simpler. And so I'm actually going, yes, simplification is really good because it makes it easier to do this stuff. And so here's another key drawing. I'm thinking about how can I make sort of independent architectural structures that could form archways, that could just really change shape, but stay independent to their own bodies. And but in fact, that wasn't the next step. The next step was this work called the Interactive Birds, and this is from the show in Beijing. Wow, the floor. So this floor, I sent an architect a sketch, and he turned it into a CAD drawing. And when I arrived in China, I had this mountain range of a floor that varied in height to the top of that the room in the back, the wall in the back, all the way down to the ground. So it was fantastic to put the birds in this sort of artificial, natural setting. So you were able to walk along the space and really get different vantage points of the humans interacting with the machines. So what was happening with the humans is that they, if you got too close to the machines, they would get nervous. There's a whole series of sensors that they would get nervous, and they would go into this sort of convulsing twitch. It sort of made you feel uncomfortable that you were human around these organic machines, and so you therefore sort of stepped back. And then if there were too many humans, you would evoke the sort of the death cycle. And so these are the birds depleted of air, completely vacuumed out of air. And here you see them in their full form, full of volume. They're not necessarily birds. They're kind of like legs, or they're kind of like, they just evoke a certain thing. And I have a feeling that I'm moving too slow. So the birds collapsing really, to me, reminded me of architecture that collapses. And the beauty of if you witness a building that's completely decayed, and you're there at that moment when that building collapses and falls down, it's the most astonishing thing. And so that kind of led me to grouping these things together more and begin building these sort of these real inflatable architectural structures, referring to the geometries that you find in everything that's being built on one level, and on another level, sort of referencing organic shapes. I'm just going to go to this one, which this was one of the early inflatable pieces, and this work just references sort of the most organic of muscles. It kind of takes an urchin shape, but these things are called hexagons. And the idea is that they sort of perform this primal dance. You perhaps saw it in the video, this sort of primal dance of the beginning of life, or as if you were looking, into a petri dish, and these cellular forms were kind of expanding contraction actions, and so I like the subtlety of the piece, but in a way I had to find a way to force the viewers to witness it. So I made a very comfortable relaxation station. So if you chilled on this relaxation station, this beginning of life episode would play out above you. And here you have actually that was so the audience, one of the early times I showed it, they tended to hang out on the floor to watch it, which sort of gave me that idea. Back to the body and the drawing again. This is a sketch in one of my sketchbooks where I was interested in this notion of an inflatable architectural intervention, where I could sort of drag a bunch of this inflatable material with my body into a space, and then have this suit not only take over the space, but sort of take over the movements of my body, and in fact, the person controlling it or the computer choreographs my movement. So the idea is that the human stays very relaxed and lets the inflatable chrysalis form dominate the motion. This is an idea taken off from how to allow these things to subsist on their own out in the landscape. And this is a depiction on top of a landfill, and hoping to sort of tap the natural gases generated from the landfill to inflate these things and keep them alive, and then sort of, therefore, maybe beautify the landscape again, because all that trash that we generate had been buried. And it's sort of a useful kind of fuel if we can tap it. So this is me fantasizing, and then this is me getting more sort of elaborate in the technological functions of these things. This is called chrysalis. It takes off from the suit idea, and also I mentioned sort of astronaut suits. I was thinking about astronaut suits because you've got this whole kind of play of motion that if you're an astronaut, you've got to have all this range of motion, but you also can't dive on the moon or whatever, right? So you have to be able to contain things with it. So these are all kind of custom-made rotary joints with double O-rings in them, and there's a series of valves that breathe air into them, and I'm just going to show you a couple of things, and maybe a little clip of this. So this is chrysalis in an environment in Brooklyn, where the audience is rushing through it, and it's changing shape and responding to either somebody performing it or a series of sensing devices that allow you to go in and kind of change the shape. And I'll play this clip of, this is sort of a technical explanation. I won't play very much of it, but let me know if it needs to be louder. Chrysalis is composed of 100 interconnecting high-tensile fabric tubes that utilize Amorphic RobotWorks push-to-connect technology. The tubes are networked into 16 live sections and animated by compressed air via a servo-controlled computer system. Each of these networks can be separately animated by the spectator's motion, which is constantly monitored by the integrated vision system. The vision system is made up of 5 cameras and multiple IR sensors. Once a participant is sensed close to the space, the central vision camera is activated. 16 sets of servo-control valves form a closed-loop network which regulates the flow of air. The air is directed through 4 master tubes which are attached to the winch motors. These arteries are controlled by driver boards equipped with pressure sensors. One of the winch motors also controls the Z-axis responsible for lifting and lowering movements. The IR sensors track the audience movement, controlling the expansion and retraction of the environment. As a viewer enters, the different sections push outwards, creating a pathway for him or her to enjoy the architecture from inside. Once fully inflated, chrysalis forms a 12-meter by 8-meter wide and 5-meter high architectural space. In its final inflated stage, chrysalis resembles a molecular growth or a crystalline formation. After several minutes in this configuration, chrysalis starts retracting and gently collapses into an organic shape. The sculpture visually and physically transforms both the architecture of the building and the audience's spatial experience. Okay, just want to segue into the next thing. So, anyways, that work was super exciting on many levels, and then on the same level, it was extraordinarily complex. And so I was longing for the sort of simplicity of the birds. And one of the things is, I think the challenges everybody with working with technology and sculpture is, like when you put it out in the public arena, how do you endure time, or how do you engage reliability, and how does the work keep alive? And well, one of the things I found is, of course, is simplification. So this work first premiered in Brazil. It's called Organic Arches, and so what happens is these forms, they begin as these organic shapes that resemble a lot of things. They might remind you of a lot of different types of things. And the idea is when you enter the environment, they become architecture. And so a lot of different things happen for a lot of different people. And what I like about it is everybody kind of comes away with a different thing. Here's a time lapse of the work showing in Riverside. Well, that's actually in Queens. And so someone's cruising through it as the whole thing closes up. Once again, there's a continuation of this sort of sound work, but the sound is in the breath. And so part of it is, as you travel through it, the thing is breathing. And this iteration of it is called Organic Arches. Let's see, what I call it, space. Time Traveler. So I'm going to run a real quick time lapse of what this looks like from the front point of view. So in a way, this is what you would experience, except a lot slower if you walk through it from the front. And then I think I just want to talk a little bit about the material. So this material I discovered back during that early inflatable. And what happened is over time, I was working with this company out of Mesa, and I began to become more demanding of what I needed as I discovered what it could do. So, over time, I'd get them to let me into their laboratory so we could do these sort of trials and tests of pushing the fabric to the max. And that was very successful, and they were surprised by how much they were learning from collaborating with an artist, and the benefit for them was that they developed all these different technologies that they could sell. The benefit for me was I was able to keep going after this sort of dream of these kind of wild things to do with sculpture and robotics. So that was that biomorphic wall taking kind of an encasing kind of shape. Okay, so back to the drawing. This is a drawing, 4x8 drawing, that depicts this sort of 10-year period of work in one environment, and I call this environment Numa World. And so what happens is you've got all these forms that I showed you, and then there's this projected fantasy in this drawing about these humanoid forms. Now these humanoid forms have been tested, but it's kind of about, it's sort of, the drawing for me is like, when am I going to get back to the human form? When am I going to get back to the humanoid? And when I get back to the humanoid, how am I going to keep these humanoids alive? And then I thought, oh my, the trees, in fact, are the way to fill them with air. And so the idea is that these roots form these passageways, and the passageways allow these cactus to get back to the tree. So if these characters called dual numas reach the tree, the idea is that the tree engages the machine and shoots it full of air here so it can continue on which leads to other trees. But if they get diverted from the trees, then they never succeed, and they deflate, and they don't make it. Haven't gotten there yet. So, but I did manage to bring all of the works into one room. This is in Munich, Germany, I think already 3 years ago, and the show is called Numa World. And so we were able to run 10 years of inflatables in one environment for an interactive installation and performance series. This image is for Eriki, who introduced me because he showed up at Ars Electronica while we were showing this in Kremsmünster, and this is yet to make it into the Numa World exhibition, but this is called the Numa Fountain, and just a few images of this. But exciting was that this showed twice for over 4 months in an outdoor situation, which is really exciting for me because how do you get soft machines to survive that kind of environment? So this is in China in the mountain region of Chengdu, and so extremely humid, a lot of rain, and extremely hot at different times, and all the technologies living inside of it, and it did really well. But so here's another segue. So little history for me is that this is the border wall that divides Naco, Arizona on the right, and Naco, Sonora, Mexico on the left side. And this is a crude Photoshop drawing over a photograph of that wall. And so 10 years ago, before I developed the inflatables, I envisioned this being possible. Of course, it was quite a long ways away to make it happen, but the work sort of evolved in stages as I learned more about how to get the structures to support themselves and behave in ways that I wanted. I guess this was 5 years ago, working with the festival in San Jose at the 01 Festival. They commissioned me to build this first border crosser. This border crosser is 17 feet at the base, and it grows upwards of 40 feet tall. And this is in fact the first big border crosser we built. And it's this moment when we finally got this to work that I realized that this is a very unpractical way to get to the border wall and cross over the border, because it's in fact so gigantic and there's nothing really practical. So back to work again, trying to figure out how to make this border crosser not only more compact, but sort of more focused on the goal, which is, the goal was to arc over a 20 to 30 foot wall and literally touch the other side, and then return back in a pretty organized pile back to its electric-powered vehicle, and then off it goes back to the home base, going back to the home base. So kind of some drawings visualizing what that would look like. And so you see these border crossers in different stages of deployment, and in sort of the Southwest, what the Southwest looks like in a charcoal drawing. So why the wedge? And again, what was happening? You spend 4 years working on something, then other things start to happen. And I'm like, well, I was thinking about the composition. If you look at this side, that's the border fence, and then it breaks into a wedge. And I was thinking, yeah, there's more than one problem with this border wall. There's this sort of, the border wall is literally dividing society in multiple ways. Like, there's a lot of ways that we're separating wilderness, we're separating people, we're putting children in camps, we're isolating the rich from the poor, there's multiple divisions. So as I keep thinking about them in drawing, I start thinking more and more about like these divisions. It's like, why is the Pacific Ocean full of plastic? Why can Puerto Rico be decimated, but we can't help Puerto Rico being decimated, right? Why next to a polluted Mexico skyline is there a futuristic city being built in the desert for billionaires, right, with its own fence, past the fence. So these questions are sort of things that are on my mind as I think about the border. So here we are in an internal space with the border crosser. The very first border crosser actually operating indoors for several trial runs. And so the first performances are literally called trial runs. This is the second border crosser in progress at the University of Michigan, collaborating with students from robotics and the art department. It was a real fine mixture, and design students as well. And so this is the second border crosser. Then the third border crosser at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, evolving in a beautiful five-story foyer that allowed us to run it. And this one looks like this when it's a full, in a full archway. Okay, let's see. Nope, I don't want to run this one. I want to run, there we go. I want to run this one. So, this is a composite image that came from that series, and this is sort of what I'm visualizing in a way for the border crosser performance. And yeah, I think I should open it up to questions because we might be running out of time. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right, so thank you, Chico. What do you think? It's an astonishing journey from Chico's beginnings in Arizona and at UCLA, and the journey is continuing. So I think that you will be showing in October
Yes.
more of the border crossers working on that. But anyway, okay, so please use the opportunity, and this is Christian Müller, our chair.
All right, Christian.
Yeah, usually I don't speak up right away, but here I just crossed my mind when I was watching this. It's kind of a pity that the Berlin Wall is not in place anymore, right? Because that would have been a perfect wall to cross over, right? And
Absolutely.
And that made me thinking, why would that wall be so perfect? Because of the complete absence of any kind of human. And I would have enjoyed to see the faces witnessing these things coming over, right? So that brings me to the point, or to the question, does it matter which way they go? From the US into Mexico, or the other way around in this visualization? It seems not to matter too much, but it does, doesn't it?
Well, I'll answer over here, Christian. For me, I thought, well, first of all, trying to get 6 of them done, and a real important part of the process is who I work with on building them. So the last one we're planning on building with the community in Juarez, Mexico, and El Paso, Texas, so they would collaborate on what the last one looks like. And the most important part that's shaping up is we want to use them as a tool to sort of gather a procession of people in those communities, and we're going to have 3 of them will come from the Mexican side, 3 of them will come from the American side, and the idea is that when they finally cross in this performance, there's this sort of sense of unity with this creature who hopefully takes on this quality for those people, that it's kind of like this. I don't know. It's like a mythic kind of character that absorbs light and then shares this notion of human unity and all these things. The same thing in relation to the Berlin Wall, and walls all over. Because since the fall of the wall, through Europe itself, there's several new walls. There's many barriers and walls keeping the people in. So the idea of this procession would take place from both sides of the border, and the timing of it is obviously super. We have to be super careful about it. But what we're hoping to do, and one of the things we're going to work with the students on here, I just wanted to break into that real quickly, is this idea. We're going to be working on a couple new generation truncations, the sort of alien aspect, the second half of this arc. And part of what we're after is giving these guys some vision, giving them an eye, giving them vision, in order, when this action happens, if we succeed at making this action happen, who's going to see it? So what we want to do is really concentrate on this live feed of the action and give the audience the point of view of the machine, in addition to whatever live footage we can muster. But that performative moment, which might be 10 minutes, might be 15, it might be an hour, we don't know that. And so part of this is like, we're making these characters, we're bringing them to those places, they're going to perform in and around the border, and then at one point we managed to pull off this action. I hope. Right? So that's what I've been working on for 4 years. And so in a way, it's like it's perhaps a pipe dream, perhaps not possible, but I don't see it that way. I mean, I can't think about it that way.
So let's verify what was nice. And then
Does that make sense? I don't know if it makes sense.
Okay, so I've been at your Robotic Church about 5 years ago in
No
New
way.
York.
Really?
Yes,
Did you change your hair color? That's why I don't
I did.
Okay, that's why I
I
noticed
do
it first.
remember, I think you were showing us around, or at least you gave us an introduction to all the creatures you had there. So they came across as they do all have, I think, names as far as I remember, and they do different things as part of the performance, and they do have different personalities in that sense. So they don't completely try to be human or animal, but they do have those traits. So my question is, what relationship do you have to them as you're giving those robotic creatures, you bring them to life?
What relationship do I have with them bringing them to life?
Yeah.
I just think, in a way, they're alternative. In a way, they're different aspects of my personality, sort of, because when they came to life, all I had to learn from was my own body, or looking around. So, in a way, they've become very personal to me, and that's why they have those names. And so you refer to them in relation to their name, which relates to their function, and it helps to describe that machine to the people who are assisting you fixing them, and perhaps they have compassion for the machine because it has a name, and they'll work harder on fixing it, I'm thinking. I don't know if that answered the question.
Hi. Yeah, I particularly like the piece, I don't know what, I forgot what it was called, the one that was wrapped around the body. That seemed like it lifted.
Architectural intervention.
Did it lift the person up off the ground?
Not
or-
yet.
Not yet. But,
No, I mean, I think often you leave pieces for a while because you don't have the ability to do it yet. And so I think the border crossers taught me a lot about lifting people, even though the intention is that they don't lift people, but I know how to make it now, and perhaps just looking for the right opportunity to get the work funded and stuff. But the idea is that it picks you up into the constellations of the body. So it would pick you up in a lying position, it would sit you up, and it would roll you over onto your head, and then you'd be like 20, 30 feet up in the air when you're getting flipped by the architecture. And eventually it sets you back down in a lying position.
yeah, I feel like that maybe evolution of that piece is I would love to see it, because I think the transition from the metal robots to the soft robots potentially changes our relationship to them. They're less scary, they're more humanistic, and they can be touched. They probably won't kill you. There seems to be a kind of potential there for a much different relationship, and maybe less about human controlling the machine or machine killing the human. Something there, I think, more of a dance or a collaboration that I was very moved by the potential of that piece.
Thank you.
We
Thanks.
have a question there at the front row there.
Thanks so much for this. I really enjoyed seeing all of your pieces. I also wanted to pick up on the question of softness that you described at some point in your presentation about this organic softness of, for example, this gesture. And what I liked about so many of your works is that you don't rely on the material to convey that necessarily, that kind of softness. And so you had the martial arts series, for example, that the robot was able to do that had this kind of softness. Or you had the car, which opened up to symmetry and kind of spread its wings. And so there was an interesting relationship between the material of the cloth in the car, which seemed kind of skin-like, but also the material of metal or steel of the car. And I'm wondering if you can say something about the relationship between series, which seems so important for these gestures, as well as material, because they seem to work together in so many of your pieces rather kind of than in contrast to one another.
Did you say series?
Yeah, the series, because that seems to be important for observing these organic, soft gestures in your work.
I think as you're sort of making sculptural decisions along the way, you sort of see what you want to keep and what you want to simplify or get rid of or reveal. And so sometimes you don't know what the final sculptural decision is until you get to the end of it, right? And so you keep changing things. Once again, I think all of the vantage points of the sculptures are important to really study each point of view, and it gets harder to study them when they get bigger or when they're outdoors and stuff like that. But the working in series, there's 6 border crossers because I was talking to Louise about it, and she's like, "Why 6?" And I'm like, "Because that was sort of the number of children I thought I would have," or actually that's the honest truth. I thought I'd have 6 children, but it didn't happen. But it was 6 became this number that I was obsessed with. It's because there would be 3 on each side of the border, and 3 on each side of the border would be more than 1. So maybe you'd have 3 times more people relating to it on one side of the border as the other. I'm not positive, but the most interesting thing, 4 years into this project, each one of these ended up being different and taking a different process and a different turn. So in a way, the sculpture was evolving and changing. And if I was just making 6 of them, immediately, I wouldn't have learned anything about it. It would have just been like production. And I had done that with some of these other inflatables, and I realized that I wasn't able to get to the final thing until I let it evolve more and more. I hope that answered the question. I was thinking that would be good.
Okay, so I have one final thing to tell you. So this week and the next week, so Chico will be doing a workshop here at the Design Media Arts, working both with some undergraduate and graduate students. So, and if you happen to be somewhere nearby this broad building, so you might see some of Chico's soft robots going up and funny, weird experimentation taking place. And having heard this talk and now learned about this astonishing work that Chico has been able to produce, then you can identify what the heck is going on. So thank you for attending, and thank you one more time, Chico, for coming and giving the talk.